At least let me wash the dishes. I will not. If some grim fate befalls you, I will not be able to forgive myself as your adjutant. You are joking about that, I hope. Perhaps, but you have also been working very hard. Save your energy for what must be done today. Alessia returned to her task once Themis retreated, scrubbing away at a stubborn fragment stuck on the clay dish in her hands. Warden's Vale was a place of many dangerous temptations that tested the will of the faithful. The first danger was that when one fell asleep at night, they might not wake in the morning. One might laugh at this assertion, but it was surely true. The rooms were warm and cozy, the beds well crafted and soft. Sturdy walls of thick granite protected those within, and the air was crisp and pure and green. All was well with the world, and it was agony to leave such a comforting embrace. If one managed to overcome that challenge, they were confronted by a generosity of provision and spirit that could surely make visitors weep in shame at their own meanness. Bounty overflowed and no one was hungry or otherwise in need. They lived free of the fears that those in other places might have, and readily gave of themselves to nurture their community. The experience was such that right-minded people were forced to stop and reflect on their lives and conduct. She wiped the dishes dry, setting them aside for later use. Walking over to the latrine door, she gave it a knock. "Themis," she said, "are you all right? Do you need me to wipe your butt?" What? A strangled voice drifted out. "What are you asking all of a sudden?" "I just thought I would ask." "No, thank you. Just go out and do that thing you wanted to do. I will come out later." "Come out of the latrine, or come out of the house?" Alessia went back up into her room and put on her armor. The equipment shifted slightly as it settled onto her form. She poked the light green placard over her belly. Were they feeding her too much? An inconvenient thing about enchanted armor adjusting to the wearer was that it could be embarrassing if one did not keep a good figure. She grabbed her warhammer and hooked it to her belt before picking up her helm and heater shield. Her boots tapped down the stairs and she made her way out the door. A thin mist blanketed the barren stone of the village square in front of the house, shrouding the landscape in all directions. The barest traces of dawn outlined the mountains to the east, but the magical lighting kept the surroundings brightly lit. The humid chill of the morning seeped through her armor, so she cast endure elements using an item in one of her pouches. Dark vision came after that, causing the darkness in the surrounding shadows to recede in her sight. She walked around the perimeter of the building, checking for problems as best as a paladin could. A bang sounded as Alessia passed one of the windows and she jumped in shock. Themis had slammed the shutters of the latrine window shut. "She's still in there?" Alessia shook her head and completed her circuit before crossing over the corner of the square. Barely any of the villagers were out, though a few homes had lights in their windows. She stopped in front of Baroness Zaradnik's home, which had an exterior that did not look much different from the other shophouses lining the plaza. The greenery in the window rustled and Lady Zaradnik poked her head out. "Good morning, Sister Alessia." "A good morning to you, Domina." Alessia bobbed her head slightly. "I must thank you again for accommodating my selfishness." "Think nothing of it," the Baroness smiled. "You have come to take a break from the stresses of the city. I am more than happy to help someone who has done so much for us here in Nerantal." Lady Zaradnik vanished from the window. Alessia shifted from foot to foot as she waited, a sense of happiness swirling in her heart. The Baroness was an excellent noble, which was to say that she excelled at managing her territory and her subjects. This also meant that she was one who excelled at identifying talent and making judgments of people. If she expressed her recognition of someone such as Alessia, then it must be so. More so than that, Lady Zaradnik was, what? Alessia had learned that she was undead some months ago, but it took her a while to figure out what it might mean. As Sursana held purview over the souls of humanity and their ultimate fate, one could reason that Lady Zaradnik had been retained to serve their god now that he was amongst them once again. Supporting this was the well-known fact that she was not just an adherent of Sursana, but a living paragon of their ways. Well, unliving now. Even that part called to attention the touch of their god. She was undead, yet human. An undead human, which sounded stupid unless one considered the whole rather than the individual. When a human died, there were two avenues for the soul: the faithful would be granted eternal peace while infidels would be granted eternal suffering. Ludmilla Zaradnik was a living saint who was granted neither. Instead, she was bestowed the honor of eternal service to the god of death. She was chosen by Sursana, an enviable existence for any follower of the Six, particularly by adherents of Sursana. Despite this incalculably lofty distinction, the Baroness did not change. At least as far as Alessia could discern from those who were well acquainted with her. She continued her observance of their tenets and did not falter in her duties. She did not exult in whatever powers she had been granted but remained humble and pious. That she continued to be what she always was served as proof that she was worthy of being chosen. As far as Alessia knew, not many were aware of what Baroness Zradnik now was. Countess Corlin knew, as did the elder Lich Captain of the Ruins Wake. The Sorcerer King of course knew, and the Baroness had confessed her new state of being to Themis, who had served as her cleric since she had been ordained. Beyond that, they didn't know who knew, so they continued to interact with her as if she were still a human. Alessia released a wistful sigh. To serve their god for all eternity. How wonderful would that be? She would rather be doing that than being eternally peaceful somewhere. Not that she was ungrateful for Sursana's peace should it be his will for her. The door to the Baroness' home opened and Lady Zradnik appeared. Following her was a tree, followed by another tree which was carried by a Death Knight. The first tree was a dryad known to the villagers as Glaza, who was treated as Lady Zradnik's daughter. Alessia was not sure what to think about that yet. Behind the Death Knight came Countess Corlin. After her followed Amelia and Tyre, the two nobles' ladies' maids. One of the Death Knight footmen standing guard at the entrance fell into step behind them. They made their way over to the wagon stop, where they boarded an open-air passenger wagon that could accommodate Glaza's tree. The wagon's sole leader conveyed them south towards the Citadel district. So this army base, Alessia said. You mean to start raising rangers for the Royal Army, Domina? They already started training last spring, Lady Zradnik replied. My training regimen for rangers is very different from that of squires. How so? They do ranger things, the Baroness said. If I understand it correctly, the curriculum for squires and acolytes is 1 part basic education, 1 part religious education, including their role in the ministry, and 1 part combat education. Combat education is divided between classroom lectures, martial drills and live combat. For rangers, we have 1 part basic education, 1 part survival education and 1 part combat education. Alessia nodded. Despite how distinct from one another vocations could be, curriculums were still structured similarly. The question was what went into the parts that differed. What goes into survival education? How is instruction handled? I believe you were away for much of the winter, so do other rangers teach them? I have a combination of things going on, Lady Zradnik replied. Rangers have several areas of expertise that overlap with those of other vocations. Civilians in forestry, for instance, share much of the same natural knowledge and woodland skills. It's to the point that I suspect that they are rangers themselves, or at least they partially are. Alchemists can identify and forage plants and other natural resources. Druids can do the same and they have a survival skill set as well. But does that not present a risk of them advancing as those other vocations? Countess Corlin asked. No more than Miss Alpha teaching arithmetic turns her students into monks, the Baroness answered. Temple education is much the same, is it not? Squires and acolytes both undergo religious training, but having a priest as an instructor does not mean that the squire is suddenly an acolyte. At any rate, the survival portion is split into classroom education, where the students are instructed on natural law, and a practicum that has them out in the woods around Warden's Vale. You don't make them wrestle ogres and ride bears, do you? Maybe later, Lady Zradnik said. For the time being, the ranger apprentices function as my village's rangers once did. They patrol the woods around their homes, trapping game and foraging for food and useful resources. Their home villages are quite appreciative of the variety that they add to local cuisine, and our alchemical reagents are always well stocked. This was the way of many villages that bordered the wild. While rangers were commonly seen as warriors, the day-to-day roles that they served were far more significant to the civilian population. They don't get attacked by wild animals? Countess Corlin's brows drew together in worry. Rangers have skills that help them deal with wild animals, the Baroness replied. If all else fails, they have undead escorting them as well. What about their combat training? Alessia asked. Combat training has not started yet. I suppose it is not necessary in the Royal Army. It is not so much that it is unnecessary in the Royal Army as it is unnecessary at this point in their training. Rangers do not need to fight to become stronger, they need only function as rangers. More importantly, they need to learn how to survive in the wild before anything else. That sounds ridiculously ominous when you say that, Lady Corlin frowned. Lady Saradnik rolled her eyes. When they are not attending classes, they are out in the woods performing their duties. All of them come home before sunset, for now. She was very good at making things sound ominous, even when explaining why things weren't ominous. Their wagon went right after it entered the Citadel district, heading towards a set of long buildings. Alessia eyed the grey granite structures, which formed a row along the road to the dam. These look like the dormitories on the other side. No, they are your army barracks? They are, the Baroness nodded. The occupants are 100% undead at the moment, but my ranger trainees will join them once I deem them fit to begin army training. Barracks for undead. The ones in the city usually stand around the same places forever. They will happily do so if they are assigned to some active duty, but the duty of those assigned here is to wait for orders. In the meantime, I have them train and learn what they can alongside their units. Since it is much like what living soldiers would do here, I decided that they should live like soldiers. My rangers will be working alongside the undead for their entire careers, so they need to learn to live with them as well. The wagon stopped in front of what appeared to be an administrative office and they disembarked to go around to the other side. The clash of blades filled the air long before they came into view of a stony field. There, 2 rows of Death Series servitors were watching a duel between a Death Knight and a Death Warrior from the sidelines. Who is the instructor here? Alessia asked. No one, Lady Zaradnik answered. Though the more experienced ones might count as that. If many of them spar every day, they gradually improve. Well, they learn how to fight each other better. They are probably overwhelming enough as they are, Alessia said. Heathen priests around the world will probably cry if they find out that someone is training the undead to become stronger. Do you know much about religions around the world? No, Alessia admitted, but most appear to dislike the undead. Ours are uncommonly nice, yes? Naturally spawned undead were generally accepted to be the enemies of the living, and this was no exception in the theocracy. Intelligent undead could vary widely, but they were few and far between. All religions came up with some justification to destroy them, the primary ones being that they were evil or were detrimental to the world somehow. Most did not differentiate summoned undead from wild undead, so the development of necromancy school magic for all categories of magic casters was usually limited to anti-undead spells. I wonder about that, the Baroness said. Mindless undead are mindless undead, but I would like to find communities of undead in other places to see what they are like. Large negative energy zones like the Katsa Plains must exist elsewhere. Lady Zaradnik seemed strangely optimistic about her prospects, so maybe becoming one of the undead had changed a few things about her after all. Alessia didn't think that any living being would consider her outlook very reasonable. The 2 sparring undead ended their match, which looked like they had simply been trying to outlast one another. Like paladins, blackguards and other defensive warriors, Death Knights had strong defense but weak offense. Death Warriors were the opposite, though Alessia thought that a Death Warrior would have the advantage if it employed its ranged weaponry before closing. A Death Priest tended to the damaged combatants while the next pair started their bout. If they must heal after sparring, Alessia said, they cannot train indefinitely, yes? Each squad has its own schedule, the Baroness said. They used to go on patrols every few days, but more undead show up every week, so patrol slots are becoming increasingly scarce. When not on patrol, they still stay with their squads and will spar like this until their healers reach half mana. Between sparring sessions, they will attend lectures and reviews by the elder Lich sergeants. Outside of that is time to rest. Rest? Alessia frowned, but I thought undead do not tire. They do not physically tire, but mental fatigue can still build up. I suppose you can call it a relaxation period rather than a time for rest. They are free to pursue their interests if they develop any. What sort of interests do they have? Spectating fights, for the most part. Sometimes they will go watch the league battles. It is not much, but it is a start. At some point, I want to see if they can be taught to read. They are not as smart as the elder liches, but, at the same time, eternal illiteracy doesn't sound very nice at all. What would Death Knights read? Alessia frowned. Romance, perhaps? Once the living join them, my hope is that things will become more lively and they'll pick up new things faster. The next pair of Death Series servitors finished their bout, which looked very much like the previous one. Alessia wondered whether it was because they always fought that way or if they all just ended up fighting that way after so many matches. Are you ready, Sister Alessia? Why yes, Domina. Are you sure about this, Sister Alessia? Countess Corlin furrowed her brow worriedly. This is a Death Knight you wanted to fight. I have been wanting to fight one since I first came to the Sorcerer's Kingdom, she replied. They are the strongest undead warriors known to manifest in the Katza Plains, so it is much like trying something you have only heard about before, I think. She sounds like this whenever she discovers a new food stand as well. Lady Zaradnik smiled slightly. I do not believe you will be able to digest this meal so easily, however. Well, I do not think I can win, Alessia replied. I just want to see how I fare. Maybe I will come across some inspiration for further improvement. She unclipped her warhammer from her belt. Its head glowed faintly with cool, holy light as she activated its passive effect. She followed the Baroness out to stand in the exercise field. We have a special guest with us today, Lady Zaradnik's clear voice sounded over the wind. This is Alessia de Altamora, a paladin of Sursana. Sister Alessia has expressed her interest in your training and would like to have a practice bout with one of you. I hope you will take this opportunity to learn new things from one another. Alessia turned and bobbed her head in greeting to both sides. Good morning, she said. I do not know how you select combatants here, so please choose one Death Knight to come and fight with me. The undead all around the exercise field exchanged glances with one another. Several elder liches conferred for a minute or two before they split up again and one of the Death Knights stomped out in front of Alessia. Its apparent strength aside, its 230 centimeter height was imposing relative to Alessia's 165. Thank you for accommodating my request, Alessia lowered her head politely. I will be in your care. Shifting metal plates sounded as the Death Knight returned her bow. Did it not have magic armor? No, that should be correct. Undead came with whatever they came with, which was usually unenchanted equipment suitable for their strength. Any naturally spawned undead had to upgrade its items much like anyone else would. She eyed the crimson tracery flowing over its black armor like veins of blood, and then her gaze went to its flamberge, which was shrouded in a pulsing black-red aura. Did that mean that the seemingly magical effect was simply for appearances as well? I guess I will just have to find out. How do we start? Alessia asked. The Death Knight lowered itself into a defensive stance, tapping its shield with the tip of its weapon. It wants me to start, huh? In that case. Lesser strength. Halo of smiting. Protection from evil. Alessia raised her heater shield and let out a laugh as the Death Knight's weapon slammed into it. Lady Zaradnik said they weren't as smart as elder liches, but they still understood that allowing an opponent to layer enchantments on themselves was a bad idea. She pushed her shield up slightly and drove her warhammer into the Death Knight's exposed wrist. The pressure against her shield vanished as it jerked its sword hand away. Nothing broken, its defense is very strong. Alessia sidestepped around the Death Knight's left, who kept its shield between itself and her. It would be difficult to inflict physical harm, but, at the same time, its strikes did not require martial arts for her to defend against. It was also not so fast that she required enhancements to her perception to follow. Since it was undead, however, it could fight without tiring, and those who used mundane equipment would find their shields and weapons being taken apart. Power flowed through her as her halo of smiting refreshed one of its charges. The spell was one of the ways through which a paladin compensated for their poor offense relative to other types of warriors. Every 20 seconds, it would refresh one charge, up to a maximum of 3. A paladin could allocate a charge to one of their attacks, which would deal additional damage if it connected with its target. If they missed or the attack was otherwise successfully defended against, the charge would be wasted. Since paladins usually spent more time defending than attacking, the spell had the effect of making the attacks that they did perform count for a bit more. She took an experimental swing at the Death Knight, but her weapon simply bounced off of its shield. The charge in her halo dissipated. This shield is too crazy. The thing was taller than she was by more than a head and wider besides. Normally, an opponent with such a large and unwieldy shield would tire quickly, but being undead negated that. She blocked 3 more strikes of the Death Knight's flambage before activating ability boost and striking back. Her attack was thwarted again. Should I wear down and break its shield with sundering attacks? No, if it cannot be repaired, it would be too pitiful for the Death Knight. Greater ability boost. Alessia pushed forward, locking her shield against the Death Knight's. Her warhammer came in low, reaching around to smack the Death Knight in its left thigh. It tried to push her away, but didn't appear to be strong enough to do so. Finally, the tip of its sword came in over her shield, as if in imitation of her own attack. She drove her shield upward, deflecting the sword away and backing out of melee range. Her steps scraped over the stone as she resumed circling around it. From the way it moved to face her, it appeared that her attacks against its leg hadn't done enough to hobble its movement. If it will not take significant injuries against me in melee, then why does it not press in? Was it being considerate of her? Or was it fighting under certain assumptions that it had developed? It could probably wear out its opponents by simply struggling in close quarters with them, or perhaps that was the reason why. If it assumed that Alessia functioned as one of the tireless undead, staying in close quarters and taking damage without giving any back was a losing prospect. Alessia cast a spell. Banehammer, undead. Her weapon flared with bright blue flames. The Death Knight roared and charged forward, its shield leading the way. She didn't wait for it to arrive. Shukuchi. She closed the distance to her opponent's right side in an instant. Pivoting as the Death Knight continued to charge by, she took her warhammer in both hands and directed it against its right hip. Bone shatter. It was a combination potent enough to destroy an unprepared Elder Lich in one hit. The Death Knight, however, simply kept going, slowed to a stop and turned around with its shield raised. Alessia felt that she had done a good amount of damage to it, but it betrayed no sign of injury. The Death Knight renewed its assault, alternating between its sword and shield as it bashed at her defenses in rhythmic cadence. It only gained momentum as it drove her back, so she led it around to mitigate the build-up. She tightened her maneuvering, exploiting its size and mass against it. The Death Knight only humored her with its single-minded determination, growing less threatening as it struggled to make effective attacks. It is just like fighting the undead, but why does that seem strange? More than strange, it was annoying her, but not because she was being slowly worn down. The principal advantages of the undead were that they were untiring, did not need to eat and did not suffer from critical damage. Debilitating injuries were only so if they lost a part of their bodies. What was annoying her was that the Death Knight was relying solely on those advantages combined with its raw power. If she were a rank-and-file soldier it would surely have been a terrifying thing, cleaving limbs and entire bodies apart with every swing. She was not a rank-and-file soldier, however, and the Death Knight only felt like a stronger copy of Alessia flailing away with tireless, yet mundane attacks. Fortress. She stopped the Death Knight in its tracks, but it continued beating away at her shield. Repulse. As the Death Knight stumbled back from her martial art, Alessia cast a spell. Second Wind. Her fatigue vanished. The Death Knight caught its balance and charged forward again, but Alessia simply straightened, raising her weapon before her visor as if in salute. Mark of Justice. The dark flambage of her opponent cleaved down at her shoulder. Fortress. Crimson eyes glared down at her. A smile crossed Alessia's lips. You should not attack so thoughtlessly, she told the Death Knight. It roared in response, raising its flambage and bringing it down in another savage swing. Her shield intercepted the attack and the Death Knight resumed its barrage of blows. After 5 hits, however, it stopped and drew back. Shukuchi. She didn't give it any time to think about what was going on. The world shifted as she appeared beside the Death Knight again, warhammer already cocked to attack. Penetrating blow. A satisfying sensation traveled up from her hand as the head of her weapon buried itself in the Death Knight's armored leg. Holy Strike. Alessia channeled holy power into her weapon. A bright blue flash emanated from the gaps in the Death Knight's armor as she sent the skill's energy straight into its body. Then it punched her in the head. Her head snapped back. She flew several meters and rolled over the ground. The Death Knight came running after her and she continued rolling along to avoid the series of vicious stabs sparking against the stone in her wake. When she finally stopped and looked up, She found the Death Knight towering atop her with its tower shield gripped overhead in both hands. A fortress. The shield whipped down and stopped against her body. It went up and came down again as the Death Knight tried to smash her flat against the stones. Fortress. This time, Alessia gripped the giant piece of black metal with her shield hand and went up with it. She arced through the air, flipping over and landing on the Death Knight's shoulders. Gripping its helmed head between her thighs, she started whacking it with her weapon. It took the Death Knight several tries to dislodge her. She was sent spinning through the air as the undead warrior flung her across the field. Her vision swirled and she landed on all fours, gauntlets and boots scraping over the ground. Alessia rose to her feet, lowering herself into a defensive stance as the Death Knight charged forward again. The match is over. The Death Knight instantly stopped. They bowed to one another before returning to the sidelines. Alessia healed herself and used her trooper's towel to clear away all signs of her duel. "I am afraid to ask, Domina," she said, "but how badly did I lose?" "You made it about a third of the way through the Death Knight before you yourself reached half," Lady Zaradnik replied. "I do not believe I have ever seen you fight seriously before, but this was quite a surprise. Your fighting style is distinctly paladin, but at the same time it is very different from what most would probably expect it to be." I hear this all the time from the fellows at the Adventurer Guild," Alessia said. "To be fair, they are probably at least half correct. Even in the Theocracy, which I believe has the most advanced paladin orders, many fight in the way that you are likely thinking of. Those who fight as I do are in the minority. In most cases, it is far easier to outlast your enemies and bludgeon them to death. They go around dispatching armies one enemy at a time. Still, I find your way of fighting very impressive. Was that holy strike one of the martial arts you spoke of with holy attributes?" "No, that one is a basic paladin skill," Alessia replied, then frowned. "Now that you mention it, I did not use any of those. I would have done much better had I, you see? Even I fall victim to that mentality." "I suppose we will see them the next time," the Baroness said. "Actually, have you had any episodes with holy energy damage?" Alessia tilted her head curiously. "Episodes, Domina?" "Well, this happened before the winter, but I was damaged by a holy weapon and I may have broken down on the spot." "Ah, yes, what you speak of is something that happens. People with incomplete understanding attribute holy element attacks to the will of the gods. This happened with me 2 years ago, but in reverse." "In reverse?" "It is a funny story, probably. I learned my first holy attribute strike art around 2 years, no, over 2 years ago and used it on Brother Marcus while we were sparring. Since he took damage from the attack, I somehow convinced myself that he had been possessed or replaced by some evil thing. Then I spent the rest of the day trying to kill him." She had very nearly gotten a number of other people to join in the hunt for Brother Marcus. It was a good memory. "That is pretty funny," Lady Zaradnik smiled slightly. "How is that funny?" Lady Corlin frowned. "I have dozens of squires who cannot mentally keep pace with their physical growth. Am I going to have a bunch of murdered paladins on my hands at some point?" "That is not likely, Cometessa," Alessia assured her. "Most squires do not learn those strike arts until after they are ordained. If it does happen, you may consider yourself blessed for having a promising squire in the local ranks." An elder lich came over from where the Death Knight was being healed. "For the sake of mana efficiency," it said, "we request that you dispel the curse you placed upon your sparring partner." "Ah, sorry about that," Alessia said with a wave of a hand. "Done." "You cursed the Death Knight?" Ludmilla asked. "Mark of Justice was the curse," Alessia answered with a nod. "Aren't curses necromancy school magic?" "They are." "What, you think paladins cannot cast necromancy school spells? They're quite handy, you know." Baroness Zaradnik had fairly extensive knowledge when it came to spells and their applications, but, by her own admission, she had recently gained that knowledge from her studies in domain development and military affairs. They started making their way back to the wagon as they discussed the match. "So what does it do?" Lady Zaradnik asked. "Mark of Justice? It is a curse that triggers when a certain condition is met. This one is mostly used in law enforcement. Say that there is a thief who is a repeat offender. A paladin can cast Mark of Justice on them. The condition would be do not steal or something along those lines. If the target attempts to steal again, They will be punished by the curse, usually inflicting damage on the target to dissuade them. What was the curse condition that you placed on the Death Knight? You may not have heard it, but I said you should not attack so thoughtlessly. The Death Knight did not heed me, so the curse was triggered many dozens of times. Speaking of which, Demeanor, I recommend that you find a combat instructor for these Death Series servitors. They are, how do you say, you are correct that they are developing bad habits in fighting only themselves. That is one of the many things that I need to see to, the Baroness sighed. The Northern Army group is far better trained because they have a larger variety of experienced warriors to spar with. My current thought is to suggest rotating squads between army groups, but what we really need is instructors to not lag behind and develop combat techniques for the training environments here. I am falling behind on my personal training as well, there is so much to do and so little time. What about adventurer training sessions? Alessia recommended, things only continued to improve with them. Many think highly of you, so they would welcome your participation with open arms. I would very much like to, Lady Zaradnik replied. The past few months have taught me much and I would like to see how I fare with what I have learned. Unfortunately, we will have our hands full between the Draconic Kingdom and everything else that will be going on. Baroness Zaradnik's undead state lent her many advantages. One of these was that slow, careful development based on her accumulated experiences was a viable option. Mortal human beings had limited time to achieve what they could in life and so had to take risks with their growth. I believe that your trials are a blessing from the gods, Demeanor, Alessia told her. All sorts of interesting experiences relevant to your vocation always seem to flow your way. Most are not so fortunate. Of course, Sister Alessia, Lady Zaradnik nodded. My impatience often makes me forget this. Thank you. After the morning's bout, Alessia dropped off her equipment for maintenance at the forge. The excitement of the blacksmith's apprentices as they handled her armor was very gratifying and her already good mood improved considerably. Warden's Vale was a wonderful place filled with right-minded people. She returned to the harbor village and, after confirming that Themis had successfully escaped the latrine, went to help conduct the morning service. Following the service, they went to the harbor's restaurant for breakfast. Lady Zaradnik appeared with her friends and their attendants to join them, as did the Dryad Glaza. Alessia eyed the plant heteromorph and her golden-red leaves, which had grown over her body in imitation of a woman's small clothes. Your daughter, Demeanor, Alessia said. She is very quiet. I do not think that she said anything the entire time we were at the army barracks. Dryads usually live alone in the forest and quietly tend to their trees, Lady Zaradnik replied, so that should not be surprising. She speaks to others when she has reason to. Dryads do not naturally possess the social behaviors of humans and other races that exist in family units and form communities. Her combat education always spoke of this. Humans tended to interpret the world around them in human terms, but other races were not beholden to that thinking. Many a naive individual met their end trying to amicably interact with demi-humans, heteromorphs and monsters who saw them as nothing more than an intruder or a convenient meal. That must be strange to your subjects, Alessia said. They still make many assumptions about her. The Baroness motioned to Glaza to sit beside her. Well, they are probably not ignorant assumptions about her at this point. It is more that they are trying to be inclusive. It probably does not work. Not in the way that they want it to, Lady Zaradnik shook her head. It does help her learn about humans, though. She is quite intelligent and learns as fast as someone who has very few common points of empathy with humans probably should. Lady Zaradnik's hand gently stroked the Dryad's shoulder as she spoke. Combined with her tone of voice, she may as well have been a proud mother extolling her daughter's virtues. She is often referred to as your daughter. Alessia cupped her hands around her tea. I suppose that this relationship is not as what most would think when they hear it, either. I left her for months shortly after she was born, the Baroness said. So you are probably right about that. Still, I think we have more than a cold, unfeeling acquaintance. Glaza will not warm up to me at all, Lady Corlin pouted. What did you do? Leanne asked. I just tried speaking with her a few times over the past 2 nights, Clara answered. So we could get to know one another. I brought some things for her as well, a silk scarf and handkerchief, a silver girdle, a hand mirror framed in golden leaves. She probably sensed your impure motives, Lady Zaradnik said. That is what you get for trying to bribe her. They were not bribes, they were gifts. What did you do when she first appeared? I am her guardian. Why would I have to do anything special? Alessia took a sip from her steaming drink. Chef Pyros arrived with their breakfast, a bowl of village stew with sides of sausage, bread and goose eggs. Alessia, Themis and Lady Zaradnik started right away, but the others did not. Is something the matter? Lady Zaradnik glanced at her friends between bites. This is the same breakfast as yesterday. Yeah, about that, Lady Wagner said. You people eat really hearty out here. I thought what you fed us in the city was an extra large portion of the stuff, but they're regular portions. No wonder you and your family grew up so tall. Did you not say that there is hope for you yet? I did, but this'll probably make me grow in the wrong places. We have rings of sustenance, too. How does that work? We are headed back to Korlin Harbor tomorrow, Lady Zaradnik said. I am sure you can survive another day of our meals here. The others reluctantly started on their breakfast. Alessia called for seconds. So we are going to the Lizardman place next, she said. They were not here originally, were they? No, Lady Zaradnik replied, they are from the Great Lake in Top. Lord Cocytus sent them here to start a new population just in case something happened. Something? Like a war breaking out and wiping them out. Anything that is a threat to the Sorceress Kingdom would go through their village in minutes, and it was the only Lizardman community in the country. Alessia saw Lizardmen in Erantal, or more specifically in the Adventurer training area, but those interactions didn't speak much for how they normally behaved. As far as threats went, the average Lizardman was stronger than the average human, but they did not live in the same environment. The lands of the Theocracy were long developed for human habitation, so Lizardmen were non-existent. There were other reptilian races in the region, but their relationship with nearby human populations was not a good one. Sea Nagas were dominant in the waters along the Theocracy's coast and clashed with the army. It was a never-ending battle since their dwellings deep underwater were impossible to assault with sufficient force. Once breakfast was finished, they parted ways with Glaza. The Dryad attended school with the children of the village, so she couldn't come with them on the second half of their tour of Warden's Vale. Lady Zaradnik led them over to the western side of the island, where a more regular-looking harbour had been cut into the stone on the other side. A smaller version of the barge they had taken up the Katza River was moored to one of the piers. How's this ship treating you, by the way? Lady Wagner asked. The Lizardmen have made good use out of it, Lady Zaradnik answered. At first, they employed it to bring prefabricated building components to their village. As far as I know, they'll mostly be using it to ferry fish from the farms once they become fully operational. I wonder if we can make specialized containers for that. Are they just gonna throw the fish in? You will have the chance to speak with them about it soon enough. The barge's elder lich captain and a pair of death warriors came out of the harbor office to convey them to the Lizardman village, which could be seen several kilometers in the lake to the west. They climbed up to the bridge, where several benches had been bolted to the floor. Lady Wagner eyed the furnishings. Did your people do this as well? She asked. They did, Lady Zaradnik nodded. It was not very pretty at first, but they eventually refined their improvements to the point where I thought they were worth paying for. You're gonna do that with that passenger carriage, too? Of course. They may be doing these things as a hobby, but what they come up with is still valuable. Once they come up with a good carriage design, I will commission them for every wagon fielded for public transport in my domain. Countess Wagner frowned at the bench in front of her as the barge got underway. Why does it feel like these guys moved in my market? They are not specifically trying to compete with you, Baroness Zaradnik smiled slightly. My subjects simply apply their talents to improve the quality of life around them. The next project that they show to me may be entirely unrelated to transport. About halfway to the village, the barge entered a course that brought it between two long rows of wooden stakes painted white. Pairs of lizardmen in dugouts could be seen here and there in sectioned-off areas radiating from their settlement. Once every few meters, one of them reached into their dugout and scattered a handful of something into the water, which started to churn from countless fish. So these are the fish farms, Lady Gonye said. They look different from the ones at the Great Lake. It is a design that they thought would work better here, Lady Zaradnik replied. I have no idea how it works, but Chief Ises claims that it will be a success. What kind of fish do they raise here? Alessia asked. A species of carp native to the Katza River. They went to catch them while they were spawning in the autumn, so we have millions of baby fish now. When will they be ready to harvest? The lizardmen will start thinning out the population in the autumn. The ones here weigh about half a kilogram already. I think the largest one I have seen from the river was over 2 meters long and 40 kilograms. The 2-year-old carp raised from fry at the Great Lakes fish farms are about 3 kilograms, so I think we stand a fair chance of matching that here. Alessia gazed at the vast stretch of marked-off water to either side, wondering how many fish would be produced. Back when we visited the Great Lake, Lady Garnier said, the lizardmen told us that they were having challenges feeding more than a certain number of carp for each enclosure. It isn't as simple as feeding our livestock. They eat a surprising amount, Lady Zaradnik nodded. 2 or 3 times their mass every day, if the reports are to be believed. The feed that you see the lizardmen throwing out there is a mix of crushed grains, chopped straw and ground demi-humans. Baroness Garnier blinked several times. Did you just say demi-humans? An entire army invaded the upper reaches last summer, Lady Zaradnik said. It would have been a waste to just let them rot out there. They were put in frozen storage and we take them out as needed. This is a novel idea? Alessia said, demi-humans are always the ones eating us, why not feed the demi-humans to the fish, which are then eaten by us? Meat was expensive in the theocracy since raising livestock was resource-intensive relative to growing staple crops. The people wouldn't eat demi-humans exterminated along the border, but they would certainly eat fish. It is not as if I go around hunting down demi-humans to feed my fish, Lady Zaradnik frowned. Besides, collecting corpses for later use is a time-honored practice of the Sorceress Kingdom. People think that leaving bodies lying around causes the undead to rise, so no one will complain, yes? Well, Lady Garnier shuddered, that just took a morbid turn. Please don't tell me you're going to be collecting beastman corpses when we go to the Draconic Kingdom. Why not? You know, Countess Wagner said. You're like an inexhaustible source of horrifying rumors. A year from now, some guy on the other side of the world is going to be talking about a crazy corpse snatcher that sucks up entire armies to feed her ravening hordes of fanatical people. I do not think that they would be frightened of that, Alessia said. There are so many carnivorous races that hundreds of thousands of people are probably eaten every day. She thought that was the case, at least. If it was humans alone, there were probably about 50 million in the region of the world centered around the theocracy. When one considered all of the other races, which included fecund races like goblins and troglodytes, the number probably sat around 2 or 3 times that, even if they did not have large-scale agriculture. There were surely many times more than that out in the world. The barge slid into a roofed-over berth in the Lizardman village, which was equipped with the same infrastructure for loading cargo containers as the harbor. A delegation of lizardmen, led by a black-scaled lizardman lord, waited to receive them. They bowed in unison as Lady Zaradnik disembarked and walked up to them. Welcome back, Lady Zaradnik, the lizardman lord said in a clear, yet smooth voice. It is good to see you again after the long winter. It is good to be back, Chiefess, Lady Zaradnik smiled, though I will be away again before long. I might be misremembering, but have you grown larger since I saw you last? I have, my lady, he said. Those who have not seen me for a time notice right away. I'm 10 centimeters taller than before. Some people say that it's a sign of being a demi-human lord. If that is the case, Lady Zaradnik replied, then your hard work has paid off. Have you developed any skills or abilities since it happened? I don't think so. My people seem to argue less with me these days, but maybe that is because I am no longer so terrible at leading them. I cannot do the things that Chief Shasha does yet. I am sure you will get there. What about your martial path? Have you given any consideration as to how you would like to fight? I believe that I will stay with the scimitar, Chiefess replied. If I can get Zariasu to train me, maybe I will not get my tongue pinned to the ground again. There's got to be a story behind that. Lady Wagner peered at the two. Neither Lady Zaradnik nor the Lizardman Lord responded, so there probably was. Introductions were made and Chiefess led them further into the village. They received curious looks as the Lizardman chief showed them around, but most of the villagers kept to their business. Alessia counted at least 8 different colors of lizardmen, but she wasn't sure what each one meant for their race. Their procession slowed as they entered the central structure and they stopped to inspect the goods at the few market stands there. Themis wandered over to where Lady Wagner was either haggling or harassing one of the lizardman merchants. "What are they selling here?" Alessia ran her gaze over the table. They appeared to be an assortment of trinkets that could commonly be found in the possession of demi-human tribes. Most were fashioned out of clay, wood or stone, with a few made from rope or fabric. Themis picked up a bracelet of polished clay beads. "This is magic?" "Yes, dear customer," the lizardman merchant said. "When activated, it provides 1 day of the virtue enchantment for each of the beads on the bracelet. It's a very popular product with so many families being raised now." "Why is that?" Lady Wagner asked. "Virtue is an orison that all divine casters can learn," Themis explained. "For lack of a better description, it gives the target a little bit of temporary durability. This is a very good magic item for those who can afford it. Accidents that might result in broken bones will leave the victim with bruises instead. Regular children aren't as durable as adults, so the effect of virtue is exaggerated on them." "Oh, you sure know your stuff, dear customer," the lizardman merchant nodded. "How many would you like to purchase for your broodlings?" I do not have any broodlings yet. I should buy one to show the others, though. What does each go for?" The lizardman merchant seemed to brighten at the prospect of making a sale. It held up one of its clawed hands. "One bracelet is 4 copper coins. If you buy a month's worth or more, they are 3 copper each." Alessia counted the number of beads on each bracelet. There appeared to be 7, meaning that each would last a week. Themis placed a silver coin on the counter, receiving 4 bracelets and a copper coin in change. She frowned and rubbed her chin as they left the stand and continued on their way. "Is something the matter, Vicar?" Lady Zaradnik asked. "What is the rate for first-tier spells in Warden's Vale, my lady?" 2 copper coins. Are these magic items produced here, chiefess?" "They are," the lizardman chief replied. "We have workshops on the 2nd floor of the compound for magic item production." "Are they available for viewing?" Chiefess glanced at Lady Zaradnik, who nodded. "This way, please," he said. They were led deeper into the building, entering a bare, circular courtyard in the middle of the village. It looked like some work was being done on it. A large flat area was being packed down in the center. "You are placing something here?" Alessia asked. "Yes," Chiefess replied. "A statue of the Sorcerer King. We had one back in our old home at the Great Lake to venerate, but it wasn't until this winter that we finished laying down our village here." Alessia furrowed her brow at the spot on the ground. Sursana had lizardman worshippers now? As a defender of the faith, did that mean she was now oath-bound to protect them? The people back in the theocracy would surely go into seizures from the very idea. The chief brought them up a flight of stairs on one side. Lady Zaradnik came closer to Themis as they walked along the balcony encircling the courtyard. "Might I know if there is a problem, Vicar Aspasia?" "I do not know whether it is a problem yet," Themis replied, "but the magic items at that stand seem too cheap. Orisons and first-tier spells cost the same, meaning that if you cast Virtue 7 times, it should cost at least 1 silver and 1 copper. That is not counting the material costs for the magic item. Preparing the same number of scrolls should be around twice as much. Furthermore, Virtue from a caster is a short-duration spell. This item provides it for a day per bead." "So you're saying that they're using a roundabout method to circumvent the official schedule for divine magic," Lady Wagner said. "Undercutting the competition through these magic items." Chiefess looked over his shoulder, casting a worried eye at them. Was he aware that they were cheating? Perhaps Lady Zaradnik would be adding lizardmen to the fish feed soon. "They don't even have any competition here," Lady Gonye poked Lady Wagner in the ribs. "Since it seems that anyone can use them, they are more akin to potions and those are far more expensive than scrolls." "I agree," Themis nodded. "Making any assertions in that direction is premature. Observing the production method should provide a decisive answer." Their party entered a workshop a few doors down from the top of the stairs. The odor of herbs, soil and lizardman wafted through the air. A forest green lizardman in mystic's garb came over to greet them. "CSH," Chiefess said. "One of Lady Zaradnik's guests had a question for you." Themis came forward to address the lizardman mystic. It was a scene that could have only ended with a mace to the face if it were in the theocracy. I was curious about the production costs of the magic items on display in the market below. She held up one of the bracelets. The prices were so low that I could not help but wonder if you were undervaluing your goods. We thought that it was a fair price. CSH looked between Themis, Chiefess and Lady Zaradnik before motioning for them to follow. He brought them over to a long workbench and retrieved a flat wooden case. Inside were 5 bead bracelets nearly identical to the ones that Themis had purchased. We order these from the potter on the ground floor, CSH explained. Each must be enchanted by one of our mystics to form the final product. How much does one of these bracelets cost? Themis asked. A set of 5 costs 4 copper coins, the lizardman mystic answered. The village goes through about 50 per week, but we expect that number to triple by this time next year. Does the craftsmanship of the base item matter? They are made by a master potter, CSH replied. Shoddy craftsmanship is not good enough. Are you capable of demonstrating the enchantment process? In response, the lizardman mystic took one of the bracelets out of its container, placing it on a clean cloth. Several seconds after he extended his claws over the item, a magical formation appeared. They watched his work intently, but it ended as innocuously as it had started. I see, Themis nodded thoughtfully. That is why the items are so cheap. Why is that? Lady Wagner asked. It uses a different methodology from arcane artisans like alchemists. For simplicity's sake, think of a potion as a receptacle for a spell. Not the bottle, mind you, the solvent. The solvent must have the capacity to hold the spell being cast. This limitation by receptacle is a general rule for many magic items such as scrolls, potions, wands and staves. What determines what a receptacle can hold is the quality of the material. Themis gestured to the shelves nearby, which were stocked with hundreds of scrolls. Those scrolls, for instance, are made out of regular fish leather and only have the capacity for first-tier spells. If one casts anything stronger on them, the vellum will be destroyed. When any magic item is crafted, the cost is essentially the labor and materials that went into the receptacle or whatever the magic item is plus the contribution of the artisan, which is essentially everything that went into research and development, their capabilities as a magic caster and their mana. So one of those scrolls is the cost of the leather and the cost of the spell, Lady Wagner said. Since a first-tier spell is scheduled at 2 copper coins here, it shouldn't be much more than that once they start mass-producing fish leather. That is correct, Themis said. Potions are more expensive because the reagents that go into an alchemical solution are more expensive. The advantage to them is that they can be used by anyone. Wands and staves are cheaper on a per-cast basis, but their purchase cost is prohibitive and vocational restrictions apply to their use. Where do these beads fit into it all? They belong to a different branch of crafting, Themis replied. It is related to totemic traditions and the other druidic practices that revolve around evoking the spiritual power of natural things. Sometimes you see practitioners with tattoos on their bodies which can be activated to channel the spirit of whatever animal that it represents. These beads are the same, they are evoking the spirit in the clay, which replicates the spell that it is enchanted with. So they're using the power of dirt. In a manner of speaking, yes, Themis smiled slightly. The formation creates a magic item imprinted with a spell applied to it. Each bead is sized to fuel one application of the spell. Once all of the charges are expended, the item disintegrates into nothing. Themis looked to CSH, who nodded in confirmation. You understand far more about our ways than the alchemists and artificers in the harbor, he said. That's quite a surprise. When we demonstrated our techniques to her and her students, they did not see what was going on at all. Alchemists are arcane casters, Themis said. Though there are major differences between us, all divine casters use the same category of magic. The formation that you use is actually one that can also be used by the temples of the Six. Wait a minute, Lady Wagner said. If you could make magic items out of dirt all along, then why didn't you do it? The temples barely produce any magic items at all. The vicar gestured to the shelves filled with scrolls nearby. Any magic caster can fashion scrolls if they have the materials and the mana, she said, but stockpiling this many is next to impossible for us. The mana of temple staff is primarily allocated to the ministry with a bit reserved for emergencies. We cannot stockpile scrolls because we have no mana to spare. With this being the case, you can probably understand that magic items in general are out of the question. Much like Riestize's lack of arcane institutions meant that the development of arcane industries was minimal, Lady Corlin said, the secular nature of the government leaves the temples as a self-managing healthcare system and not much more than that. Each shrine, temple and monastery functions independently with no overall direction and thus no collective resources to allocate towards industry. I am fairly certain that divine casters of substantial talent are also poached by the theocracy, at least until recently. Alessio exchanged a look with Themis. The truth was that it was still happening. Unknown to most, a Miko princess was lost 2 years previous. Several of her temple guard were also slain in the incident. With Themis approaching the threshold of Tier 5 magic, which was the minimum qualification for a Miko princess, the theocracy was beginning to make overtures. Alessia was similarly being targeted because they needed new temple guards, or perhaps it was why she was sent to attend to Themis in the first place. One thing leads to another, I guess, Lady Wagner muttered. But I don't think that's happening anymore. What's to stop you from doing it now? We still have a major staff shortage, Themis said. The needs of the people always come first. Mana is not the only factor, however. The second part of the problem is the material limitations that I mentioned. These items work with virtue because it is an orison, a Tier 0 spell. Regular clay cannot fuel first-tier spells, so one would have to graduate to better materials. So you go from dirt to stone to iron or something like that? It is easier to consider that each type of material has a grade which correlates to a certain tier of magic, so there are different types of metal, stone, leather, fabric or wood. An alternative is to refine a material or receptacle to the point where it can cast more powerful magic. Furthermore, techniques must exist to fashion those items and the materials they use. These techniques are very resource and time intensive to develop and perfect, so they are in the realm of industrial and national secrets. With this lizardman method, Alessia said, one would think ahead and see that extremely rare and expensive materials are eventually required. No one pursues this route understanding that there were actually various sacraments and relics in the temples that were of the type of item that they were discussing, but they were generally not consumed save for dire emergencies. In the theocracy, one could say that every temple and shrine was a stockpile of magic items. The Irantal Cathedral, on the other hand, only had the same relics that they were gifted generations ago when the city was founded. That may be the case, CSH admitted, but we will still try. We no longer live in subsistence, so we have the time and resources to devote to research and development. Warden's Vale is also rich in natural energy, as evidenced by the birth of Glaza. What we can accomplish here may go far beyond any expectations. They ended up staying over an hour discussing magic item production with CSH, at which point he led them to a clear space at the back of the workshop. People usually saved the best for last when it came to showing things off, but Alessia wasn't certain whether this applied to Lizardman. This area here is where we conduct our ritual magic. Alessia went into a fit of coughing. The others stared at her as she wiped her eyes of tears. Did you say ritual magic? She croaked out. Yes? That couldn't be right. Can you demonstrate this ritual magic of yours? All right. She couldn't read the lizardman's alien expression, but the tone of his voice was dubious. After calling 2 other mystics to come and participate, CSH took his position at the center of their circle and led a ritual that imbued a fish vellum scroll with a first-tier spell. They're using ritual magic to create first-tier scrolls. Alessia wasn't sure whether she should laugh or cry. Themis poked her in the shoulder. Are you all right? How? Where did you learn this ritual magic from? Alessia asked. It was passed down through the Red Eye tribe's traditions, CSH said. With the formation of the Lizardman Alliance, the practice has spread to the other tribes over the last 2 years. There was no precedent for any demi-human society in the region to have ritual magic. Never mind ritual magic, magic casters amongst the local demi-human populations were limited to races with innate casting ability, sorcerers and unsophisticated tribal mystics. Based on the variety of magic items in their keeping and the spells required to create them, it appeared that these lizardmen were unsophisticated tribal mystics, but how in the world did they develop ritual magic? In their effort to protect humanity and allow it to develop without interference, the slain theocracy worked hard to suppress non-human populations in the region. They culled them when they started to develop martial arts, combat skills and other foundational elements of civilization. If they were a particularly strong race or had absurdly strong individuals, it might be more difficult to enforce this policy, but these lizardmen were not particularly strong. Out of curiosity, Alessia said, "How is it that you became a part of the Sorcerer's Kingdom?" "His Majesty came to us about 2 years ago," Chief Isis said. "After being tested by Lord Cocytus, the Sorcerer King spared us and we swore our eternal loyalty to him. In exchange, he promised to bring prosperity to our people." "I see." Alessia's face became a stony mask. These lizardmen had somehow eluded the efforts of the slain theocracy for generations, cultivating a society that should have seen them exterminated. Then Sursana himself just happened to take them under his protection. No coincidence could be so fortunate as this. All she could think was that it was the will of the gods. Ritual magic was one of the theocracy's most powerful tools, yet it had come to the Sorcerer's Kingdom with laughable ease. Now it was in the possession of Sursana's chosen, who would use her resources and authority to develop it to heights unimagined. A shiver of excitement traveled up her spine. Earning a place as a temple guard at the Eye of the Water God had been one of her greatest aspirations. She had worked hard to be the best paladin she could be and studied just as hard for her dream job as the attendant of a Miko princess who led the great rituals of the slain theocracy. Alessia could not turn down her assignment to the Sorcerer's Kingdom, but anxieties rose over whether she would ever return to the theocracy and become what she always wanted to be. Turning down the theocracy's proposal to return with Themis hurt her more than she wanted to admit. Now, it seemed that her god had answered the fervent prayer that was her life's work. All she needed to do was remain steadfast. Omnia tempus habent, et sui species transient universa sub cielo. To everything there was a season, a time to every purpose under heaven.